Welcome back, everybody. We haven't lost too many people through attrition here, and I'm really pleased because the next session, we heard in the previous session about hackers coming together to do good and to help find missing people and so forth. But of course, as with anything in humanity, there's always the bad side to the good side. And we do know, and we are very well aware of so many targeted malicious attacks on emergency services systems, 911 centers, and so forth. It's an ongoing problem. It's a global problem. I mean, attacks have increased in Europe as well as in the US. And for this reason, I'm very pleased to have two speakers here today from the 911 Association. We're going to be looking at some of the approaches, what needs to be done, what can be done, and looking forward to the future. So we have Brian Fonts and Brandon Abley, who will be taking the stand now. Thank you.
I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. And just before we begin, I'd like to say a couple of things. First off, I want to thank Gary for the invitation to have us here, and also to the EENA staff and board for putting on an amazing event. And as importantly, for you to be here. I mean, it's a great opportunity to finally come together again during this COVID times in our life. So thank you, I appreciate it. The other thing I'd like to say is, for those who follow US standards, yesterday the NENA i3 Rev 3 standard for next generation 911 was approved by ANSI, the American National Standards Institute. So now it's there, and we move on for the next iterations. Yeah, it is something to applaud. The thousands and thousands of hours of volunteers who work in the standards development organization at NENA are the ones who deserve the real credit. I want to also thank my colleague Brandon for coming in and trying to just shepherd the process a little bit and adding his expertise and encouragement to move things along and responding to questions that ANSI had in the review process. So it is good news, and so there you go. So my presentation today is going to be hopefully brief, and a lot of this you may already know. And if you don't know, I just invite you to go to NENA.org to get an overview of our organization. And let's see how well, some of the people in the audience know me well enough to know that if there's an opportunity to mess up technology, I'm the person. So anyway, I'm going to give a little bit of a background on NENA. There we go. And then this is an important part. NENA as an association, we're a nonprofit, but we have a role with the Department of Homeland Security in the United States. And I want to speak to that perhaps a little more importantly. Brandon's really going to get into the interoperability of NG911 and the security components associated with next generation 911. So let's go. Background. These are all of the stats about NENA, but basically we're a standards development organization. We provide education and government relations work, or advocacy, if you will. And we have the opportunity to work with over 17,000 members in the United States, well, actually in North America. We provide the technical and standards operations, and I think this is important. And the final bullet here is we are an open standards organization, and that, I believe, is absolutely important, and we're dedicated to 911 issues. This is a little bit of an org chart, not that you really need to understand our organizations in this detail, but it's important to understand just the relationships that we have. We have our NENA membership, our NENA board, and Jennifer White is here. Monica Millions, our past president, a former president, now past president. And then we have our development steering committee and committee work groups. We have myself and our NENA staff. So it's a very slim organization in terms of NENA itself, but the number of volunteers who work in the development of the standards is rather substantial. So here are a few more of the talking points respecting that. 911 in the United States is in itself a challenge. We have all sorts of 911 centers. Yesterday I mentioned that, or Wednesday, I mentioned that something like 73% of the 911 centers in the country have 5 or fewer 911 professionals. We have somewhere between 5,000 and 6,000 911 centers, and that doesn't even include the federal government's 911 centers. We have a wonderful and sometimes awkward relationship with the federal government. We have to deal with state laws and regulations, also with the Federal Communications Commission. And so there's a lot of work that we are engaged in with these organizations. And recognizing, too, that we are part of an international fabric, as we all are. And that's one of the pleasures and fun parts about coming to EENA, is to talk about the common issues that we all face wherever we are in the world. The commonality, I think, far exceeds the differences. And we learn from one another, and there's opportunities, I believe, where we can work to help and augment each other. And this is just simply, these are the facts. Just the challenges that we face, the jurisdictions, the number of PSAPs, so much of this is local control, local governed. The lack of interoperability, just the challenges associated with that. A lot of the limited interoperability that exists is really the result of contracts or negotiations, if you will, between or among 911 centers, and it's usually isolated to a specific jurisdiction or geographical area. We also have a problem with funding. Funding is uneven, it's all over the map. Currently, we have legislation pending in Congress that would provide $10 billion for the deployment of next generation 911, but the operative word was in Congress, or the operative words. And whenever everything is in Congress, and we would be dependent upon them to allocate that $10 billion, but it's always a risk. You don't know what will happen. So that's some of the key issues there. Again, the jurisdictions, the rollout of next generation 911 is a patchwork quilt. It is happening, that's the good thing. And the fact of the matter is we need to make sure that we have next generation 911 nationwide. In the United States, like where you live, the overwhelming majority of calls come from mobile devices. And because of our local nature of 911, for those of us who work in the Washington, D.C. metro area, you may actually drive through 3 or 4 PSAPs going from the office to your home. And there has to be that quality of service available no matter where that mobile customer is. And so this is one of the important reasons to ensure that we have the funding and the capabilities to move forward and deploy next generation 911 nationwide. I already talked about the I3, and some of these issues Brandon's going to focus on in his comments, so we'll just list them here. And these are the areas of our standards work, and there's a lot of standards in the development process. And it keeps going, and it keeps going, and it keeps going. But these are all important standards associated with not only next generation 911, but security associated with 911, everything relating to the ability to move data and information, the security and safety of all of that. So, and then this is where I'm going to turn things over to Brandon in a minute, and he'll go through this diagram in greater detail. But here's some of the core functions and benefits of Rev 3 of the I3 standard. And in here, you will see there'll be opportunities to ensure for the security of next generation 911 systems. Okay, what I want to talk about just briefly is the role that NENA has relative to the federal government and also state governments, but primarily federal government. NENA is a nonprofit association. I'm a private citizen, yet I have top security clearance to participate in the Department of Homeland Security meetings. Every Monday morning, like clockwork, I'm on a call with a variety of federal agencies, carriers, cable providers, communication providers in general. And we go through all of the efforts and issues that may have developed during the week, and if there is in fact a catastrophe that affects the infrastructure, which then would affect 911 service, then we may be on calls multiple times a day over the week. There's no distinction between workday and weekend, morning or night. It's just that you're on these calls. The Department of Homeland Security was created really in 2001 in response to the World Trade Center attacks and the Pentagon attacks. And the idea was that a lot of these agencies that you see the acronyms for were independent agencies, and oftentimes the information would stop at the agency and not flow to other agencies that could benefit by knowing things were taking place. So the government was trying to create one agency that deal with all of these different issues, but have the opportunity to move information from agency to agency to provide for greater continuity, if you will, in ultimately the provision of a variety of services. The one that I wanted to talk most about is the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, and that's the one that I interact with the most. And the relationship that we have with them is that information flows from 911. So if there is a cyber attack, we're made aware of it. There's a process and a procedure to notify the government about the cyber attack. We will also be engaged in information from the government down related to that cyber attack. Additionally, we're a nation, like every nation, we have our natural disasters. And we're a nation plagued with hurricanes, earthquakes, and fires. I'm just waiting for plagues, locusts, and a few other things to come our way. But with respect to that infrastructure, the important thing is 911 now has a priority in those discussions. In the recent hurricanes in the Gulf Coast area, these calls took place regularly, and every call within the first 3 issues identified, 911 service, sustainability, and restoration was raised. And it has now become, in many respects, one of the top 3 priorities across the board for all of the infrastructure, private sector, government, to ensure that 911 services are restored. So it's a wonderful working relationship that we have, and it's an important relationship we have. It's an opportunity for government to reach down into the 911 community for problems that may be facing the 911 community with respect to infrastructure and security issues. And it's an avenue for the 911 community to reach back into government to assure what's going on. Now, in the event that there were some catastrophe, whether it's a cyber event or national event, that would involve a more secure set of conversations. Because of my security clearance, I would be able to participate in those meetings to provide input from the 911 community and also to push back information that's permitted to be pushed back to the 911 community itself from the government sources of information. So that working relationship is very important. And I'm grateful for that opportunity to work with my colleagues at DHS and to have that type of experience. So I think, Brandon, this is where, well, this goes into all of the details on CISA, the subset within the Department of Homeland Security that I work with most closely. And then within CISA, there's the NCC, National Coordinating Center for Communications. And this is where we keep tabs of all of the restoration efforts associated with any disruption, whether it's cyber or man-made or natural disasters. And it's a very vital part. We are in partnership with public safety members, private sector, and federal agencies. And this is a series of slides that hopefully you'll be able to access if you wanted to go into any greater detail. Okay, so now, Brandon, I'm turning this baby over to you.
All right, thank you, everyone. So it's important to start your day off right? And I asked the hotel to do my laundry, and they put my jeans in the dryer, which turned into tights. So that's how my day's going. So I'm going to give an overview of some of the things that our standards development community has done to deal with the problem that the 911 system in the United States is actually several hundred different systems. And as alluded to in an earlier graphic, about 3,000 jurisdictions that have like key decision-making authority about how 911 works, right? So in the United States, no matter where you go, you can dial 911 and you just expect it to work and you expect someone to show up and help you. And your average US citizen thinks that the US has a 911 system, right? But we don't. We have a lot of them. And that's where the standards development community becomes extremely important, because we've developed consensus specs to try and address the problem that we have so many different systems and so many different independent jurisdictions making decisions, which is a problem that is pretty similar to Europe as a continent, I think, when you look at it that way. So I have about like 30 slides that I will not go through, because we were allocated the very curiously specific amount of time of exactly 27 minutes, 11 minutes and 18 seconds of which we have left. So I'm gonna fly through. The idea here, though, is that you have access to these slides, you have access to our documents and stuff. As I go through all of these graphics, it's just to give you an overview of what our association has available. Brian had mentioned the FCC. That's an important thing. In the United States, the only coverage that we have from the national government from a regulatory perspective is only the telephone company, right? The US government does not regulate the internet, and the US government does not really regulate devices that access the internet, which is a curious problem. We have this hook where anything connected to the public switch telephone network, which is this aging dinosaur, is the justification for pretty much all of the national law that we have that covers 911, right? Which leaves the problem to the standards development community to solve for the rest of the nation. And I am not a lawyer, by the way, so this is just my opinion. We have some examples about interoperability that I don't have time to go through right now, but it's sort of like a key message that I like to tell people about NENA as a standards development organization is that our volunteers, and we have a couple of them here in the audience, I see, we can write the specs, we can design the solution, but we can't make it happen, right? That is up to each implementation. And we see this in other industries. RCS is a great example. Is anyone familiar with RCS? Does anyone think that really got messed up by a few companies and really didn't happen the way it should have? But over-the-top applications are very popular, right? So again, this is some overview stuff. I only have a few minutes, so I'm just giving you an idea. I really recommend that you read the Open API definitions. Henry thinks that's funny. One of the things we do with our standards development, though, is that our volunteers define the interfaces between stuff. Which is really important because we have all of these different systems and we have all these local governments that operate their own things independently and a variety of vendors. But by standardizing the way that stuff talks to each other and standardizing how you ask for something and what you get, we're able to kind of have a sort of cohesive 911 service throughout the United States. Even though it's actually several hundred different systems, it kind of feels like one. And this is important for cybersecurity, which I will get to in just one moment. So if you have several hundred different 911 services in a republic, as we do, how do you deal with security and trust, right? It's real easy if you have easier if you have one enterprise and you get to engineer the security within your enterprise and within your environment, but we have to trust each other, right? The European Union had an approach to COVID-19 vaccination certificates where the systems trust each other, right? Which is actually the same technology that we use to establish trust in NG911. And it's also the same technology that secures a website, which is fun trivia for those of you that are not aware. So the thing that we're establishing in North America to establish trust in a secure zone for next generation 911 in the United States is a public key infrastructure. Again, the same technology that secures a website, that allows your operating system to tell you that you can trust that the programmer that compiled the code for the application you're installing is okay to install. It's actually all sort of the same stuff. And what it comes down to is actually this very medieval process called a certificate authority, where literally a few people attest that they saw something happen, right? And then there are these very secret keys that are secured in a vault that requires a couple people to go into and a couple of other people to enter separate passwords in order to even access this secret number, which is the basis of security for the entire internet, right? And is also the basis of security for NG911. What we do is that we have this root certificate authority where a group of people in Utah have all signed off and said, we were there, we saw the number be generated, we saw the number be secured. Those people are all trusted. Somebody like Brian, who has a security clearance, certainly not somebody like me. That's a joke, actually, to be very clear. And then that secret number will be used to scramble some other numbers, and that's where we get something called a signature, a digital signature. And the fact that that number is almost impossible to access, and you have multiple people that need to access that number, is what establishes sort of like the baseline of security for the whole thing. And this is how the internet works, right? HTTPS, you all know, right? It starts with a couple of people in a room, probably in Utah. There are other vendors, but the largest one is in Utah in the United States. And so we do this with NG911. Through this chain of trust, we use these signatures to do things like prove that someone has a specific role, right? So between one system and another, I can present my certificate and I can say, I am an ECRF, which is the thing that routes your calls, right? I can say, I route 911 calls, and something else can say, oh, I trust that you route 911 calls because you have this thing that can be traced back to this medieval ritual that happened in the desert, and I can accept your traffic, and that's secure, and everything is okay. This is really the fundamental thing that establishes security in NG911 in North America. And it goes back to documents and meetings. We like to talk about how security is about really fancy technology, but honestly, that the underpinnings come to decisions and consensus. And we extend this trust through domains and through different nations, through cross-signing. If you really want to learn about certificate authorities, I will be very happy to put you to sleep. It's Friday morning, and happy hour isn't for like at least 6 hours, so I will spare you. With that, I think we can move to questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. I have to say, when we first met and they said, we've got 80 slides to get through in 27 minutes, I didn't think you'd be able to do it, so well done, and thank you very much for that. So, have we got any questions from the audience? I'm looking. Hands up, don't be shy. I found it absolutely, I suppose, what became clear to me, and I'm obviously not an expert in this area in any way, shape, or form, but it's the sheer scale of the multi-layered patchwork that seems to have grown organically over the years. So just looking at it all at one point and going, well, how do we tackle this, must have been a massive challenge in the first place, mustn't it? Just to understand how it all works and the interoperability and so forth. And I've really taken the issue of trust, which is just absolutely across the board in any discipline or anything. What do you think are the challenges for the future? And I'll start with you. Yeah, sorry. And there's the
who
thing
am I
with you.
looking
Yes, yeah, right behind you.
The look stops somewhere. Yeah. I think there are several challenges. Obviously, there's the technical challenges and getting buy-in by a number of different entities to ensure that they do have the right trust. They have the right keys in place to enable the movement of information data securely through to and from 911 systems, next generation 911 systems. But I'm going to speak somewhat to a different layer of challenges. And the whole notion of having 3,000 jurisdictions, 5,000 to 6,000 PSAPs, it all boils down to at least two factors. One is the human factor, and one is the financial factor. And the human factor, I think, is as challenging, if not more, than the financial factor. And Malad and I were talking this morning over breakfast about FirstNet in the United States, and the challenge of each public safety authority having its own control, and then now not necessarily having that control, but releasing it. They're now becoming a subscriber to that cell phone service called FirstNet, simplifying it. So the leadership, the human factor associated with wrapping your head around the importance of cybersecurity, what needs to be done in the world of protection of, in this case, next generation 911, I think is extremely challenging. And Brandon and others have the challenge to try to make me understand it.
I think that's the difficulty, isn't it? And
it
Brandon,
is.
If I could ask you, sorry to interrupt,
No.
but we're nearly out of time now. If you had one thing to say to our audience about this, about the complexity and the way forward, what would it be?
Yeah, I think the biggest problem in my experience is that consumer technology is much cooler than what we have in public safety, which the consumer like big internet company culture has now entered public safety. I mean, these awesome solutions that are delivered over the top. All you have to do is install the clients or access their service through a web browser on yet another monitor that's in your PSAP. So now your dispatcher has like 16 monitors that they're looking at. And none of that is standardized, and it doesn't work together, and it is, only interoperable with other customers of the same product and all these things. It's very straightforward to just deploy a service, as long as you log into my website or as long as you install my client. Yeah. But the interoperable standards-based stuff that we need to have for huge patchwork to work together, that's slower. It's cumbersome. It takes consensus, and we're kind of lagging behind.
Getting there, but lagging behind. I mean, it's fascinating. I'll just like one little anecdote. When I first started crisis response 17 years ago, I met with an advisor to a telecoms corporation, and he was just there to sort of keep the CEO in line and say, what if? Almost like the court jester. And he lectured me on interoperability. He said, what about the layers? You're building in different layers, and then the people who built those original layers retire or leave and take certain bits with them, and sometimes you just don't know what you end up with. And that's a massive challenge, isn't it? I'd like to say thank you very much, because we're out of time. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Brandon. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.